Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host today. We're recording this episode on a Tuesday morning, and I'm joined finally by Samuel Luckhurst. He's been off for 2 weeks or so, I believe. I spoke to him yesterday. He's been away in the United States. Samuel, it sounds like you had a very good, enjoyable holiday, but it was also slightly tiring as well.
It was. It turned out I was in the same vicinity as Casemiro, who's on his holidays as well, as he's not in the Copa America, and in that mid 30s temperatures. I did feel like I was moving around at a similar pace to Casemiro as well. It was very draining, very exhausting, but also very enjoyable. Not necessarily your usual holiday in terms of relaxation, but certainly very active and went by very quickly as holidays often do as well.
Are you going to upload that photo you sent me wearing your Mickey Mouse merchandise from head to toe? Are you going to upload that on Twitter? Or are you going to keep that
No,
private?
no, I will. That there's a reason why certain social media accounts are very much private and very try to conceal them as best as possible, and there's a reason why I've got to
If that
work on
photo
as well. Maybe
existed,
maybe
if
one
that
day,
photo existed,
maybe
I'd
one day.
kill to see it, but it doesn't exist, unfortunately. I'll
I
just, I'll
can't.
just clarify that.
I can confirm I've never bought a pair of Mickey Mouse ears. I did have I probably had a Mickey Mouse. In fact, I did have a Mickey Mouse hat when I was a kid and taken there by my parents. But that must be, if it's not stowed away in the attic, it's maybe in some collector's merchandise that they've managed to get their hands on.
Yeah, you're definitely allowed to wear Mickey Mouse ears as a child. We'll get straight into the football then, Samuel. We both agreed to give you a chance to give your reaction to the Eric Ten Hag news. You were obviously aware. We expected the decision to be communicated quite swiftly after the FA Cup final. I think you worked for around a week after that game before you jetted off to the States for a well-deserved break. But it was a surprise how long it took, really. We got there in the end. United have backed Ten Hag. He will continue next season. He will remain in charge. What is your reaction to the process and the reaction to keep Ten Hag?
Well, it's strange in that it feels like Ten Hag has ceased to be the story since the FA Cup final, because he held up his end of the bargain. He oversaw a masterful performance. It's all well and good winning an FA Cup final, and teams have won FA Cup finals before without performing or providing a memorable performance. But United did. They were brilliant. We've rhapsodised about how terrific they were on the day, and after that, the story was, well, when are they going to communicate the decision? And they informed us, I think, early the following week, 2 or 3 days later, that it wouldn't be imminent, which I think was a bit of a surprise. But really, the shift was on that bank holiday Monday, 2 days after the FA Cup final, which I was fortunate to be working because it was quite busy. And I mean, I did the story that United were considering keeping Ten Hag, and sometimes when you're told something, you you soften the actual copy because you don't want to go too far in that you're kind of protecting, you're covering yourself. You don't want to, you want to have a bit of wiggle room there. But when I was told that specific information, I thought at that point that's a quite significant shift, and I suspected at the time that they would keep him, but I was never going to write something as strong as they're definitely keeping him. We've already seen a story that was done, of course, before the FA Cup final that was promising he was going to get sacked, and that didn't happen. So that's some of the minutiae that we have to deal with in the industry in terms of dealing with those stories. But just those developments on that bank holiday Monday, when obviously Kieran McKenna had been sounded out by United, and in the end, he decided to stay at Ipswich. But I thought that development was prompted by United giving signals that they were likelier to stick with Ten Hag, and of course, with McKenna sticking around at Ipswich, it meant Chelsea had to look elsewhere as well. So they went for Maresca. There was a theory that Chelsea had, um, no idea if it's true or not, but it's certainly been doing the rounds in our circles, that Chelsea were apparently responsible for that story before the FA Cup final because they wanted to disrupt United's plans because, of course, Chelsea qualified for the Europa League. United, that was unconfirmed until the FA Cup final. And of course, what happens is that United stun City, they nab Chelsea's place in the Europa League, and they relegate Chelsea to the Europa Conference League. That's one of the theories doing the rounds, but I've no idea if that's true or not. But that's just another added subplot to those days around the FA Cup final and around Ten Hag's future. But after those working days, a week after the final, I found it very, very strange that Ineos took, was it 17 days in the end after the FA Cup final to come to the conclusion that they would not sack a manager who they were planning on sacking in May and who, I mean, they sounded out 4, 5, 6, however many potential replacements to come in and get him, and now they intend to give him a contract extension, which just feels like a contradiction of the process they've gone through to keep him. And Ten Hag's well within his rights to kind of aim a few digs in here and there, which it seems like he has done on Dutch television. And as we all know, when someone speaks in their mother tongue, they're always going to communicate a lot more colourfully, a lot more cleanly, and it seems like Ten Hag has done that, speaking about Ineos's decision-making process. The fact that he confirmed that they told him they'd spoken to Tuchel as well is pretty extraordinary. And I think Ineos, in trying to banish uncertainty around the manager's position, they've actually created more uncertainty. And people at United acknowledge that there is still uncertainty, albeit until the contract extension is resolved. But even when that's resolved, there's going to be a scenario going into next season where there are going to still be 3 or 4 quite prominent managers who have either been sounded out or linked with the United manager's role who will be available. And almost people look at them and see they'll almost be looming like vultures around Ten Hag on the off chance that United have a poor start to the season. And some of us were theorising. It wasn't me. It was a colleague who said that, and he said this before the FA Cup final. He felt that they would probably keep Ten Hag just because Southgate wouldn't be available until later on in the calendar year, and then you're looking at possibly an international break if things are still not improving to make that managerial change, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, whether there is a contract extension or whether there is. But as I said, when we spoke on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, however long ago it was, probably a little longer, that the story had become Ineos, and Ineos do look a little bit amateurish the way they've gone about this process. And Tyrone was telling me he'd been told that Sir Dave Brailsford had contacted someone at a Premier League club asking them about how they went through their managerial process of finding a replacement for someone who they'd sacked last season. And you think, if you're needing to do that, I get it that they are learning on the job to an extent, but they have been dealing with football clubs for quite some time. Nice and Lausanne, isn't it, the Swiss side?
Yeah.
And yeah, I get it that Manchester United are a different beast altogether, but there's still, I'm still yet to see, I'm still yet to hear or understand why these guys are the right people to be making the decisions at United. I mean, Sir Dave Brailsford can talk, he can use as many hand signals and hand gestures as he likes and use holistic language and use this rather, meaningless phrase of high performance and talk about, making the first team section at Carrington more communal because it will let natural light in and all this nonsense. I mean, I don't think they had any problems with that at the Cliff when they won the treble 25 years ago. And yes, times have changed, but in essence, I think there's still a lot needed. Ineos need to do a lot to convince Manchester United supporters and convince us that they know what they're doing, because this process, it gives the opposite impression. And to have required more than 2 weeks for a season review when Brailsford attended the majority of games off from the Boxing Day game against Villa onwards, and Jason Wilcox attended a fair few games after he came in. I mean, what were they doing? Were they just enjoying the prawn sandwiches, going from director's box to director's box at Premier League grounds. They're watching the games. Why would they not compiling the evidence there and then so they could quickly move on to this season? And I remember after 2 years ago, after the final day, when of course United lost, different circumstances. United lost to Crystal Palace in their final game. Ten Hag, of course, was in the stands. He'd been named their new manager about a month before that as well. So the forward planning was all sorted there. And of course, the following day, it was his press conference unveiling. And John Murtagh, we spoke to him a little bit before the press conference started, and he just said, "Look, we want to draw a line under this season and move on to next season." And they did that very quickly, very swiftly. With these guys running the show now, they were trying to extend United season. Well, they did extend United season well into June. And okay, it might not cost them too much in terms of forward planning because they have decided to stick with the manager. And of course, Ten Hag will have been involved in plans for recruitment and who's going to leave the club as well from the playing squad. But going back to the original point, the story, it's not become so much Ten Hag, it's become Ineos, because essentially they've kept a manager on the basis of one game in a 52 game season. And as brilliant as United's FA Cup final triumph was, and there was a lot of emotion around it, it seems like they've made partly an emotional decision, also a decision because they just couldn't get the candidate they wanted, because Kieran McKenna decided to stay at Ipswich, Thomas Tuchel wasn't going to get the budget he was going to have, or whatever other reason. It's been a pretty cack-handed way of going about it. I mean, if Ed Woodward had gone about this, then he'd have got pelters, and rightly so. And it does remind me a little bit of Tottenham a few years ago when they sacked Jose Mourinho, and then they were scrambling around for a manager, and in the end made the wrong decision in going for Nuno Espirito Santo. In United's case, they've scrambled around for a manager and in the end decided, actually, we'll stick with our manager. So they will only be vindicated if United have a very, very good season next season. And they have got the capabilities there to make that happen. As I've said before, I think there's a nucleus of maybe 6 or 7 players to build a very good team around if they get recruitment right, if the medical department is overhauled, if they don't have anywhere near as many injuries as they did last season. If those adjustments are made and they get those tweaks right, and they've got, as I said, that you've got those core players to build a team around. I think there were some very good squad players to depend on in that next batch, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and then you've got the academy where they've just had a triple crown season, and you would want or hope for a couple of them to make breakthroughs next season as well, if at all possible. So I think they have got the capabilities there to do well next season. But there is also, as there always is with Manchester United, there's a lot of pressure attached to that. And there's even more pressure attached because of this process they've gone through where, as I said, they were planning on sacking a manager, and then on the basis of one result, they've decided not to sack him. Because let's face it, if they hadn't have won the FA Cup, there's absolutely no way they would have kept him. And we've all seen the footage. I mean, I was there when Sir Jim Ratcliffe walked past, and he looked very unsettled when he was asked that question by the reporter about Ten Hag. And then there was that fascinating footage that the FA captured on their YouTube channel, which showed Ratcliffe looking for an alternative exit so he didn't have to walk past us again. And he didn't. Him and Brailsford both dodged us. Sir Alex Ferguson didn't, David Gill didn't, Avram Glazer didn't. And the fact that you've got Avram Glazer, who's not afraid to, he won't say anything to us, but he's not afraid to walk past the press. And then you've got Ratcliffe, who has spoken at great length about what needs to happen and change at Manchester United. There he was hiding from us effectively. It's not a particularly good look. And in keeping with the way Ineos have gone about all this, none of them fronted up to communicate the decision. The timing of the decision, it was gone 10 p.m, was it? English time, I think it was,
Yeah,
in
quarter
the
past
UK.
10.
So 10:15, that says it all as well. And the irony is that United in recent years, they've become very sensitive to and vexed by leaks, even though Sir Alex Ferguson described the club as a sieve in one of his last interviews. And leaks at football clubs, in political parties, in the entertainment industry, wherever have happened since time immemorial. But there seems to be a particular fascination around it with United. Yet Ineos purportedly leaked tidbits to a favoured outlet, and the confirmation of Ten Hag, the confirmation that Ten Hag was staying, was leaked by someone at Manchester United to a favoured conduit. So, if I don't think they can really complain if there are more leaks, and there will be more leaks next season, as there always are, when reporters report them.
Ten Hag is set to sign a new deal, which was always probably going to be inevitable because he's just got 1 year left on his contract. It expires next summer. If you're going to back him, you need to give him a new contract because that would have just continued the uncertainty and the narrative around him would have dominated the start of next season. It's going to be fascinating to see the actual terms. I mean, we'll try and find out ourselves, but it won't be announced publicly, of course. The actual elements of that contract. Ten Hag has previously had a veto written in his deal, and he's previously said that certain power over transfers is a non-negotiable for him. But it does feel like, Samuel, that he has to concede a certain amount of power now this new footballing structure is operating, and he's going to have to work under this new regime. He made an appearance on Dutch TV, as you spoke about in your first answer, on Sunday night during England's game at the Euros, and he briefly discussed his contract. So that is going to be really, really interesting going forward to see how that unfolds.
It will be, and there may have to be compromises there. I was told that the meeting he had with United officials in Ibiza was positive, and there's genuine goodwill. But there's also acknowledgement that all parties need to be on the same page, and at the moment, it doesn't sound like they are. Of course, Ineos want to change the role from manager to head coach. Clearly, he's not going to have as much sway in the transfer market as he did in his first two summer transfer windows. Everybody could tell from the first summer transfer window that Ten Hag was effectively dictating United's policy, and in some cases it worked. I remember, I think the scouts had pushed for Pau Torres, but Ten Hag wanted Lisandro Martinez. I don't think anybody would dispute that. A lot of people would dispute paying 100 million euros for Anthony. And okay, Ten Hag doesn't sign the checks, doesn't negotiate the fees, but he should have known that Anthony was not worth going that far along the line in terms of a budget, and whether there was an alternative. Should he have suggested that? How does that change now? Who's going to have the power? Dan Ashworth is people. If you Google his name, I'm sure Manchester United is one of the first results that comes up with it. But he's not a Manchester United employee yet. Jason Wilcox spent last summer recruiting for a Championship club. Should he be spending this summer pulling rank over who Manchester United sign? That's something else to. I think that if you're in Ten Hag's position, that's an argument worth having. Are you going to get a guy whose wheelhouse is in cycling to pull rank over transfers? No, I don't think you are. So it's, of course, I understand the intention to have this new structure, and it's almost an easy get out for Ineos if things don't go too well next season, that where the structure hasn't been completely done and completely finalised, that is going to have a knock-on effect. And I think Ratcliffe has already said that, hasn't he? He's complained about these talented people that they want to recruit, but they have to serve a period of gardening leave. And of course, Omar Barada officially doesn't start work until next month. He's been working for a number of months unofficially in a United capacity. I think he said something at the weekend as well in terms of transfer market dealings, and it'll be interesting to see how it pans out under his watch.
If you believe Ashworth's absence, obviously Dan Ashworth's still on garden leave, Samuel. If you believe his he had to kind of join United officially, he's going to have that much of an impact on the season. You just pay the money to Newcastle, surely, wouldn't you? If that's going to be an excuse down the line. I know that demands have been unrealistic, and it's frustrating to watch this episode develop the way it is. But there is an element of that where I think United should just kind of pay the money and move on, get Ashworth in place. it would have been fantastic to have him in his role for the summer transfer window, the first official window of Ineos's time as co-owners.
I certainly get the logic to it. I think from United's perspective, they don't want to look as though, quite understandably, that they're overpaying for a sporting director who joined Newcastle for about £4 million a couple of years ago. And from Newcastle's perspective, I completely understand it that if a player was to move from Brighton to Newcastle and then he's wanted by Man United, his his value. It's strange that we're talking about that in the context of a sporting director. It is going to increase quite drastically, and United have been adamant that they will not pay an eight-figure fee for Ashworth, and that was going back to February 4 months ago, and things really still feel like they're at an impasse. There've been very incremental updates on that since. I mean, it's clear that Ashworth is not going to work for Newcastle again. It's clear that eventually he will probably, his next role will be at Man United, and it's too late really for him to have an impact now. If they were to just try and get him in this summer, it's clearly not going to happen. I think it's safe to say. And recruitment planning, it starts. Plans are usually at United, they're finalised in January in terms of their targets, and that does stack up. I mean, with Jared Branthwaite, he's someone that they have been watching very closely and have been planning on making a move for several months, and they've done that. They've not wasted much time in making that move. Whether they sign him or not, it remains to be seen. But there's a good chance that they will get him. And clearly Ten Hag is going to be on the same page as that. I don't think that's when you look at the profile of Branthwaite and the fact that United need defenders. I mean, why wouldn't Ten Hag want him? There's a very good chance that Branthwaite could be a very good defender over the next decade for club and country. But where the chief executive is still on gardening leave, and Jean-Claude Blanc, who's the interim chief executive at the moment, he's seen. I think he's more of a marketing head rather than a. Barada, of course, was the chief football operations officer, I think, wasn't it, at Manchester City? So there is a difference there, and I don't think anyone's pretending that Jean-Claude Blanc is going to be kind of like doubling for Dan Ashworth at this point. And of course, Jason Wilcox has got this technical director role. The specifics of that, United have not communicated still, and of course, Ten Hag has said that he's had to develop quite an intense relationship quite quickly with Wilcox because time is of the essence. With the timing that Wilcox has come in from Southampton, but from what I was told, the point man still on transfers is Matt Hargreaves, who's the transfer negotiator who only started last year and has got a good reputation, which is, I think I wrote that back in September, that he was looking to change the culture of United, and I think that there's a good chance that he will still stick around, even though there's uncertainty over a lot of people's roles at the club for a myriad of reasons. But he does feel like someone who is pretty well aligned with Ineos, and given that he's got that experience of the summer transfer window last year, it's logical that you'd want to kind of maintain that continuity for the time being. Now, it may be different next year if Ashworth is in the building, but also last summer, you look at, I mean, the hit rate from that summer transfer window, it looks better after the FA Cup final, but ultimately Mason Mount has got a lot of convincing to do. Andre Onana, I do think, will be better in his second season. Rasmus Højlund had a good first season, and I think there's a good chance he'll score more goals in his second season, but his season did still end with him on the bench, and United deciding to play without a striker in their final 3 games, their defining 3 games as well. Sofian Amrabat was a dud until the Arsenal home game and did tremendously well, and I thought was phenomenal in the FA Cup final. Johnny Evans has been one of Ten Hag's most successful signings. Sergio Reguilon is one of those players that I think people will forget he played for Man United in about a year's time, and outside Bayern
Sergio Reguilon won't forget.
Yeah, I think
He loves dining out on that.
Al will just be grateful that we've mentioned him on the podcast. So it was a mixed transfer window to say the least. But maybe in a year's time, after some of those players have had a second season at United, it will look like a more positive transfer window.
I don't think I told the story about waiting in the Brentford mix zone. Was that in April? I think it was in April, wasn't it? Down at the GTEC Stadium
March,
in London.
last weekend of
March.
March. Yeah,
There you go. So it all blends into one. But obviously, as I was standing in the mix zone and the players were leaving the ground, and Sergio Reguilon came waltzing through, and he had a Ganacho shirt around his back and a goodie bag full of United goodies and shirts and whatnot and merchandise. And the Brentford security guard just laughed as he walked through because Reguilon had been recalled at that point and he joined Brentford on loan. He was a Brentford player. And the Brentford security guard laughed and was saying, wasn't he just at United for a few months? It's quite bizarre to see him with that
yeah.
much United stuff leaving the ground as a Brentford player. And lastly, then, Samuel, just end on this part. Look, you mentioned it yourself. With Lissandra Martinez back, Luke Shaw back to fitness, who are huge for how Ten Hag wants to play. They're really, really crucial. And hopefully, with the injuries as a thing of the past and the medical team improved, United have the tools to enjoy a much improved season. And it could be a really positive year, especially if they make a strong start to the campaign.
I genuinely think that. I mean, that was the last piece I wrote before I went on holiday about the potential of the team for the manager, whether it was Ten Hag or whether it was going to be a new manager. And you did see that to an extent in the cup final. I mean, some people might see it as a one-off, that game, and look, that game was not in keeping with United's season. It was their best performance of Ten Hag's reign. Never mind last season, and the way they played was not in keeping with the majority of their performances in terms of how compact they were, how intense they were. Their game management as well. Game management was dreadful last season. The amount of late goals they conceded in the final 10 minutes or in added time. Um, there was a bit of drama in the cup final, of course, with Anana's mistake for Doku's goal. But even after that, they managed the game really well with Hoyland providing that focal point and winning that foul late on, which it was a bit similar to Harry Kane's performance, I thought, in the second half the other night for England in terms of taking the sting out of the game, which is what you need a striker to do from time to time. So, when we talk about having every player fit, that is a rarity in football. And I think Ten Hag, he was quite selective at times. He'd say, "Oh, I don't have the players," but then he'd say, "Oh, it's more than 11 players. You need a squad." And that was one of the arguments I felt that was, that undermined him, in that he would say that I didn't have these players, but it was still very much his squad. They'd spent more than £400 million on bringing players in and strengthening that squad, and it was very much a squad in his image. So it was on him if he was unable to find solutions when defenders were dropping like flies, or Casemiro was injured all that time, and Amrabat barely played. Amrabat went nearly 5 months without a Premier League start, and when he was recalled, I think we all wondered, well, why didn't you just play him? I mean, you play him as a defensive midfielder, and he didn't play there very often, even before he came in for that Arsenal game, because he was having stints at left back, and it felt like it'd been a long time since he played, and he's in the actual role that he was bought to occupy. And I'm not for a minute even suggesting now that they should just sign Amrabat permanently. I'm sure there are a lot of people who think they should, but that would be a knee jerk. I mean, you're basing that on what, three performances, probably the Arsenal, Newcastle, and City games in May, which is a hell of a trio of good performances to submit as evidence to Manchester United to, if you're Amrabat, to say, sign me for this. But that's 1 month. It's a season over 9 months, and I suppose if the way Ineos have operated, they have essentially judged United on 1 month rather than 9 months, which is very peculiar given all their talk about high performance and all this. I mean, there is a lot of jargon in life these days, and Dave Brailsford is responsible for a lot of that, and some of the people who work with him at Team Sky have not spoken particularly flatteringly about it since they've parted ways with him. But going back to whether United have the tools to do well next season, I do think there's potential there. I mean, they underachieved last season. They finished 8th and they lost 19 of their 52 games, and they got the wooden spoon in their Champions League group. That was a colossal underachievement. And I'm always of the opinion that Manchester United should be judged on their Premier League season, first and foremost, and secondly, if they're in the Champions League, their Champions League campaign, and both were colossal failures. And there's only one, the main reason is that Ten Hag is still in charge is because of the FA Cup win. And of course, trophies absolutely matter. I don't think Ineos have looked at the bigger picture. I think Ineos have, they've, as I've said, they were sounding out alternatives to replace him. And in the end, they've decided, because of all the circumstances, to keep the manager and give him a contract extension, which I don't think is the right. I know you said that it would be logical to do it. I'm not necessarily sure about that, in that ultimately, if Manchester United's aspiration is to be to win the Premier League title, Ratcliffe has already said that's a long shot for next season. If they do win it, it's a hell of a story, and there'll be books written about it, no doubt. But I don't think anybody's got United down as title challengers for next season. If they get back into the Champions League for the season after that, you're under a manager whose record in the Champions League is actually quite poor. It's gone out of the group stage 3 times. It's lost the last 16 tied to Benfica when Ajax were favourites. The exception, the anomaly, of course, was that captivating run Ajax had when they knocked out Real Madrid and Juventus, and they were Lucas Moura a kick away from getting to the Champions League final. But are you giving a guy a contract? And again, I know United as a Champions League side, overrated is probably the wrong word, but certainly overplayed in terms of their association with that competition. I mean, you compare United's trophy haul in the European Cup with Real Madrid's, and United once upon a time, and some may still be of the opinion that they're the biggest club in the world. They're not. Real Madrid are. Real Madrid have won 5 times as many European Cups as Manchester United. If you want to get to a level where you're competing to do something in the European Cup again, you're not going to get a shot next season. You may get a shot the season after that. But is this the manager to back with it, given his record in the Champions League? Maybe that would change if Ten Hag is still in charge at that point. But again, I think whether the contract extension will clearly happen, but I don't think it will necessarily banish the uncertainty that will still linger with Ten Hag's position just because of this process Ineos have gone through. That's not Ten Hag's fault whatsoever. That's all on Ineos. And Jose Mourinho signed a new contract with Manchester United in January 2018. He was sacked in December 2018.
The new contract is an effort to kind of end the narrative, isn't it, of uncertainty, but there will still be uncertainty if they start the season poorly. However, Samuel, I believe they are going to win the Premier League title actually because of Sir Dave Brailsford's marginal gains. Anything is possible with marginal gains on your side. I've started implementing it in my life.
And jiffy bags, possibly. Hopefully not.
I could do with some of them, I think, as well, for my runs. We'll leave it there for part 1. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll fly through some transfer bits in this part before looking ahead to the Premier League fixture list, which was revealed or announced on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. But first of all, Samuel, we'll just start by talking about Jared Bramthwaite. United had an opening bid rejected for the Everton defender, around 35 million, and including add-ons. We kind of discussed a few podcasts before you went away about what his value would be. Everton value in between 70 and 80, and you suggested, well, of course they're going to say that, all right, and then perhaps United and Everton could meet in the middle because Everton aren't exactly rich, are they? They're struggling for money, they're cash strapped. So what kind of fee is good enough for Bramford? What is he actually worth? I'm thinking maybe 55 million add-ons. I think that would be fair, but Everton are going to hold tough. United are going to kind of lowball as they have done with their opening bid, and it's going to be fascinating to see whether they can settle on a fee.
I agree with you in terms of a realistic valuation there for him. It will be I think the clubs have got to meet in the middle there, and yeah, it's just it's not the most it's not the most
Exciting
interesting
discussion for
of
a
topics.
podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But it
Yeah,
is high on the
so
agenda, though,
apologies.
isn't it? I mean,
It is. Yeah.
Brantford is a huge target. He's the first player they've made a bid for that we know of. Anyways, this summer transfer window, and he could be in quite early. Could be their first signing of the summer.
I think the kind of like the interesting parallels there is that obviously because of his age, his style, and the club he's playing for, he's likened, and even his frame to an extent, he is a little bit like John Stones, and he's a ball playing centre back, and they talk how good he is with both feet as well, and really United need someone who's going to be more predominantly right footed to go in there with Martinez, and if you're spending, I mean, in terms of the fee that Branthwaite would command, you're looking at and his age, you're looking at him as being probably the starting centre back with Martinez. I know it doesn't always necessarily work out as uh, it doesn't always go as it would appear on paper, shall we say, and there are times where a player will have to come out of the team or they have to adapt, and that's why. Given Maguire had a good season last season and probably won't be sold just because I'm not too sure there'll be a market for him in the summer, and he's going to have a pre-season with United because he's missing the European Championship. It's good to have him around, and I think he can be a pretty good mentor for Branthwaite as well. It's changing of the guard is maybe a bit of a stretch there, as Maguire, although he played a lot last season, I don't think anybody still looks at him as a Manchester United first teamer. But that was the problem last season. There weren't many starting centre backs who really attained that first team status on a long term basis because of the injury issues in the squad. I mean, ironically, the one who probably had the longest run was Varane, and he's been released. He's played his last game for United. Maguire had very good spells in the team, as we discussed, and he was on course to start the FA Cup final until he got injured. And as we said, he conducted himself really well last season, given the pretty bleak starting point and some of the stick he got in during pre-season, which really came to a head in Dublin, where it was some of the stick he got and the grief he got from some of the clownish fans over there was really really uncalled for. And fair play to him, he ended that game getting an assist for Facundo Pellistri, and then he went on to have a good season. And I would like to think that he won't be getting booed on pre-season this summer when United play in Norway and Scotland and the States. But with Branthwaite, that there would have to be a period of adjustment. And I think with the going back to the Stones comparison, when Stones was at Everton, I think it was almost seen that he'll end up at Man United just because if there's a good young player at Everton, as we saw with Wayne Rooney, the belief is that they'll end up at Man United. Ross Barkley was linked with United a hell of a lot when he was making waves at Everton as well. And when with Stones, when he ended up at City, it was mainly because Guardiola came in. I think if Guardiola doesn't go to Manchester City, I don't think City sign John Stones. And Stones was still he did go. I think he was in the Euro 2016 squad, but he was seen as a bit of a running joke at the time because he was this defender who wanted to dribble with the ball and wanted to play the ball out, but couldn't seem to defend. And now 8 years down the line, he is one of the most successful English centre backs that there's ever been in terms of the heights he's reached. He has attained that world class status. He's won everything with Manchester City. He's had an exceptional career. He's been part of a very good England team as well. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say he's possibly going to be categorised as one of England's greatest ever centre backs, just because of his club career and his contributions to England in some of their best tournaments. And I know he was rusty the other night, but he's been unwell, hasn't he? He's been injured, so I don't think you're going to judge him on one iffy performance against Serbia. But it felt like that summer when City signed Stones and United signed Eric Bailly, who was very good in his first season. But the way United are thinking now in terms of signing centre backs, there's definitely a shift there, and it changed a little bit with. I mean, Bailly was pretty good on the ball. He was better than people gave him credit for. And then the following year, they signed Lindelof, who was a very un-Mourinho centre back. And I think maybe in hindsight, Mourinho regrets going for Lindelof, and he'd have maybe wanted someone a bit more robust. But Lindelof has still spent 7 years at United. Harry Maguire, you look at his frame and he almost looks like a rugby player, but he's very, very good on the ball. And he's had 5 years at United now. Um, Varane, everybody knew about his reputation. Lisandro Martinez, less so, but he's another ball playing centre back. And the way United are going about selecting defenders now, it's it's playing on the front foot, and that was Ten Hag's bugbear last season with Shaw and Martinez being out. He felt that compromised the way United played, in that their defence was naturally deeper because they couldn't get higher up the pitch, and of course that also compromised the way they could use Andre Onana's distribution as well at times. And we saw what a difference Martinez and Varane as a partnership made in the FA Cup final. And Martinez, it's a pity that he has played only a handful of games for United over the last year, because he has been probably, in terms of the whole package, he has been Ten Hag's most successful signing, but he's not played enough, and he needs to have a really fulfilling season, and he needs to be a lot fitter and a lot more available. And some of the injuries he's had have been freakish, and of course clearly the first round of surgery on his metatarsal was botched, and Ten Hag rushed him back, albeit in invidious circumstances, against Brentford when Varane and Lindelof both went off injured. So he was forced to turn to Martinez, and then he got injured in training a few days later. The injury against was it Vladimir Kufal of West Ham, that was unfortunate as well. But ultimately, he's been quite injury prone over a 12 or 13 month period now. But he's such a good player, and nobody's spoken about his height since probably Brentford away in August 2022. His impact on the team has been that significant, and the United fans adore him. The players clearly adore him. Ten Hag clearly adores him as well. And from the press box perspective, I've spoken to him a couple of times, and as aggressive as he is, he's actually a very softly spoken, very charming lad to speak to as well. I thought the night before the FA Cup final, I felt a bit more bullish about United's chances, and it was because you looked at the team that was probably going to play, and you thought that there were players that you'd want on your team. And of course, Martinez is a player that if you're in the lineup and you look down the line and you see that he's on your team, you're thinking, I'm really, really glad that he's there. And so he's going to have a huge impact on the new starting centre half who comes into the team next season. And of course, United want that to be Branthwaite. And it is interesting how there's been a recalibration in English football about how we view centre backs now. It's not just signing a lump who's going to be blocking the ball, who's robust, who's a good shield for the goalkeeper. It's someone who is actually going to carry the ball a fair way from the goalkeeper as well and move into midfield. I mean, football is ever evolving, and Guardiola is the main pioneer of that. We've seen that with Stones and how he stepped into midfield, and I'm sure United have similar aspirations for Branthwaite. Possibly, we've seen how Diogo Dalot added strings to his bow last season, making those runs where he was effectively cropping up as the striker, and it came off with his goal against Brighton on the final day of the league season. And the days, I think David Moyes said it in his column for the Sunday Times at the weekend, you put a lineup on paper now, and most teams, it's just there on paper, in that when the game starts, out of possession, it's a different formation. With the ball, it's a different formation. When they're pressing, it's a different formation. And United have been very, very, very slow in evolving like that. And hopefully, for their sake now, they'll actually get quicker to it, and someone like Branthwaite, who's a very modern centre back, that would only help them.
I think the reason I brought up his feet again, because it is a bit of a boring discussion, is number one, personal terms aren't going to be a problem. They rarely are when United are involved in transfers. And as well, the club have famously overpaid in the past. I do feel like Ed Woodward's mistakes are still kind of haunting the club in the market, and they probably will continue to do so in the next few years. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for Jim Ratcliffe's regime to kind of distance themselves from those mistakes and go, look, we're not going to pay those fees. And if that's what you're demanding, we'll walk away from the deal and look at other targets, because unfortunately at a certain point in negotiations, that's what you have to do if the fee gets too high. And it prevents things like Anthony for 86 million, which was obviously a big mistake. Some of you've written the line on Mason Greenwood and Jadon Sancho and a brief update on them too. Do you want to just expand on them?
Well, those two are players that United are more than happy to. I think it's safe to say actively push out, because neither have any future at the club, and rightly so, for very different reasons. And the confirmation that Ten Hag was staying, that ended any lingering possibility of Sancho getting a kick for United again. I think there was a report regarding the meeting United had with Thomas Tuchel that apparently Tuchel wanted to reintegrate Sancho into the squad, and I thought Tuchel was probably the most suitable guy to come in and replace Ten Hag, but that would have been that should have been a red flag. I know Tuchel, he'd have probably managed Sancho, wouldn't he, at Dortmund? I think he was at Dortmund at that time, in 2017. So of course there's a relationship there, but some things have to be taken out of the manager's hands, and that is one of them. Had they gone down the line with Tuchel, Ten Hag was completely correct in the way he dealt with Sancho. I mean, I found it, that quote that Jurgen Klopp came up with when he was on his long goodbye at Liverpool about the way United dealt with Sancho. I mean, even Benny McCarthy didn't really help himself when he gave that interview, and he ignored the key fact that Sancho had accused his manager of lying, and that's why he was banished. He wasn't banished because he'd been crap in training. I think that if he hadn't have put that post on his social media site, then there's a chance that he'd still have a future at United. But it's amazing how things can change, because of course, after the Champions League semi-final, Sancho was effectively doing a victory lap on social media because Dortmund had reached the final, and he played very well in the first leg of the semi-final against PSG. Come the final at Wembley, and he was a ghost again. I thought, particularly in the second half, I forgot that he was still on the pitch, and I thought, well, this is history repeating itself, because he was anonymous in the FA Cup final, almost pretty much a year to the day earlier, and that's kind of Sancho. That's his mentality. I've said before, he has not got the mentality to succeed at Manchester United. He just hasn't, and it's completely logical that, given the reasonably successful spell that he had at Dortmund in the second half of last season, it's completely logical that they want to cash in now. And Ten Hag said that at press conferences towards the end of the season, that players' values were increasing, and he said that specifically about Sancho. And 30 million, I don't think United would accept anything lower than that, because of the PSR rules and the need to get revenue in from sales. But of course, they see him as a little bit higher because Dortmund have just reached the Champions League final. But as Ten Hag also noted, Dortmund, they didn't actually have that good a season. They've not qualified for the Champions League next season, have they? Because they finished 5th or 6th in the Bundesliga. So, as I said, there was a lot of, there was the victory lap after they got to the final, and that was a very creditable achievement. But in the end, Sancho, it didn't really end on a successful note for him. And the way United are gearing up for the future with Ten Hag staying, and you've got Garnacho on the left wing, you've got the need for a new forward to come in. Ahmad is a more integral player now as well, after a good, encouraging run-in. Of course, Jadon Sancho should be sold. He should be sold just because he accused Ten Hag of lying, and the way he reacted over that. But from what I was told yesterday, with Mason Greenwood, his probable departure is at a more advanced stage in terms of discussions. I'm not too sure specifically which club, but I don't think the way it's from what United believe could happen there. It sounds like that he will head abroad, which he did that last season with Getafe, where he spent a season on loan there, and it's probably in his best interest given the last what's gone on in his life over the last 2.5 years.
Someone's got to take a punt on Sancho for £30 million. I suggest. I think there's a lot of upside there. I think if he can click, although I've been saying that for the last 3 years and he hasn't clicked at United, so remains to be seen whether he can actually return to those levels that he showed for Dortmund so regularly during his first stint at the club. You mentioned Klopp there, Samuel. Should we discuss the player briefly who spoiled Jurgen Klopp's farewell season, Ahmad, with that goal in the FA Cup quarter-final at Old Trafford? What a goal that was. And he's set for a more prominent role in the first team next season. I mean, very disappointing. I mean, I say very disappointing. He was injured for the first half of last season. Then he came back to fitness in December, but he didn't really play in January or February. He wasn't really given the opportunities we hoped he would be given. Finally, towards the end of the year, he finally got some momentum. His performance against Arsenal was excellent. He got a goal and an assist against Newcastle in that 3-2 win in the final home game of the season. He obviously didn't feature in the FA Cup final, but there was some really promising signs from Ahmed toward the latter part of the year, and he does deserve that role into the new season, doesn't he? I would argue.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, Ten Hag kept saying, he was injured the first half of the season, and he missed 5 months, but he still took way too long to actually start him. He didn't. His first meaningful start for United was against Arsenal in May, as his three previous starts, which were under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Ralf Rangnick, they were in heavily rotated teams, and all three of those games came in 2021. So it was a long time coming, but he was good against Arsenal. He was even better against Newcastle. He was okay against Brighton. I think he came off in the second half of that one, but given his form at the time, and certainly compared with Amrabat as well, who enjoyed a similarly good run of form, he was slightly unfortunate at the start of the FA Cup final. I think Ten Hag, of course, he was right. He got pretty much everything right that day. But I think when we were discussing it pre-match, the prospect of pitting Ahmad against Vardiol would have been a bit of a stretch, and they got it right with Garnacho starting on the right, which in itself was an interesting move, given that Garnacho played predominantly on the left wing last season. But I'm pleased for Ahmad, because when Amari Forson was starting ahead of him against Fulham, and when Anthony started ahead of him countless occasions, it must have demoralised him. And I think it did. I mean, there was that passive aggressive social media post. I know he tried to suggest it wasn't related to that, but I think it clearly was. And it could easily have disheartened him, because Amari Forson, I just don't get what Ten Hag saw in him. I know sometimes there are managers who see something in a player that nobody else can see, and it pays off. I mean, Mourinho with Scott McTominay is probably the best example of that. At the opposite end of the spectrum, Louis van Gaal bringing in Paddy McNair and Tyler Blackett didn't really pay off. Both of them just did very well to actually play for Manchester United. I'd have said that of McTominay as well, but my goodness, what a good job he's done in terms of forging a successful career at the club. And with Amari Forson, he had some exposure on pre-season under Ten Hag, but I never got the sense that he was remotely ready or looked particularly settled playing first team football. I think he did all right actually when he came on in I think it was the FA Cup quarter-final against, the semi-final against Coventry. Not that was ever going to get much coverage, given the rather farcical nature towards the end of that game. But again, when United released their released list, they didn't use the word released in copy whatsoever. It was referred to as retained list. And look, don't worry about offending anyone if they say that Amari Forson and Shola Shortiri have been released, it looks weaker to have said that you've actually offered those players who have and had absolutely no future at United new contracts. They shouldn't have been getting new contracts. Just take the compensation fee that they'll get from whichever club signed Shortiri and from Monza, who've already signed Forson. Forson as well was, there was some noise around him when he was in the academy that he could leave United for Arsenal. I think it was maybe 4 years ago. Didn't happen, of course, but ultimately, I don't think United are going to be looking at him and ruin the day that he left for Monza, and for Ahmad to have overcome that setback. And I remember that Fulham defeat as well. I mean, Ahmad came on in the second half and did quite well, and whenever he was introduced in games as a substitute, United were either losing or drawing. And I think we said, well, maybe start him and you'll be winning. And okay, it didn't happen against Arsenal, but it certainly was the case against Newcastle. He scored a tremendous goal. He's assured of cult status with that unforgettable winning FA Cup quarter-finals goal against Liverpool as well. But he fits in with the way United play. He's an exciting player. He's a right winger. I'd say he's probably their most natural and best right winger as well on his day in terms of the attributes he has. I'd rather have him in the team over Anthony. And he's at a good age. He's still only 21. They've made quite the investment in him, rising to £37 million. That deal was done nearly 4 years ago. So they've taken their time getting there, and I get that he was always going to need one or two loans, and the Sunderland loan went really well. The Rangers loan did not go so well, and I think in his first full season they were looking to send him out on loan to Feyenoord, but he got injured. So he's had a couple of injury setbacks. He's had one bad loan, but he's had one good loan. And this calendar year has been very encouraging for him. I'm not too sure what his circumstances are with the Ivory Coast national team, because he wasn't included in that squad recently, and he wasn't in the AFCON squad. But he's been named in 22 of the last 25 United matchday squads. He's had good impacts whenever he's been on the pitch, and the supporters really enjoy seeing him come on in games or start in games. And I think it's a bonus for United that he'll be available for the entirety of pre-season, because he looked like he could have a good pre-season last season, that he started those first couple of games. And of course you saw him in Edinburgh against Lyon, and then unfortunately he got injured against Arsenal in New Jersey, and we saw him leaving on crutches, and then he didn't play again until late December against Forest. So that was a setback, but he should have started far sooner than May the 12th. It would have been, I think, against Arsenal. But at least belatedly, they've recognised that there's a really good talent there who's worth investing in that sense of giving him a big role in the squad. And certainly next season, if he's in a matchday squad, whether it's as a starter or as a substitute, it's the United attack is better off for having him there.
Onwards and upwards for Ahmad. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him in the new season.
Yeah,
and you're right, completely
absolutely
right about Amari Forson. His move to Monza is actually really interesting. I mean, he looked really raw and inexperienced when he started against Fulham in February. He came on, didn't he, within 10 minutes, and he flew into that challenge that he was lucky to evade a yellow card for. But I mean, Monza just got promoted to Serie A for the first time 2 years ago. They finished in mid-table for successive seasons, so it's going to be interesting to see how he fares out there. A really kind of a bizarre move. Is that unfair to describe it? Is that an interesting move? 22...
I think he won't struggle to get a Ferrari, will he? Which is would be one perk of moving to Monza.
And the weather's nicer as well, and Milan isn't a bad city to be next to either, I must admit. It's a lovely place to visit. Fixture list briefly, because it's been a long podcast. United have Fulham on the opening day, a Friday night fixture, Samuel. That's a rare treat, isn't it? Should be a great atmosphere for United fans to head along to Old Trafford on a Friday night. That's followed by Brighton away at the Amex, Liverpool at home, the third game of the season, Southampton away, and Crystal Palace away. So they're the opening 5 games. We're not going to get into every single match. that Liverpool game stands out just straight away, though, doesn't it? It jumps off the paper. That is huge. If United can get a win, that'll be huge for Ten Hag, especially against the Liverpool side who have just got rid of Jurgen Klopp and are going into a new era.
Yeah, of course, it's the matchup of the two Dutch coaches, and they'll have met by then, given there's the friendly in South Carolina, which is also in August, on August the 3rd in the States. It'll be August the 4th in English time, I think. But so Ten Hag and Arne Slot will be coming up against each other twice, within the space of something like 28 days or whatever it is. But in terms of, I think when we look at it quite selfishly, and we look at it and we see September, and there are back-to-back away games at Southampton and Crystal Palace, having had the long journeys to end the previous season. We think, oh God, please break it up a little bit. That's what I was looking towards the end of the season. It was like,
well, I'm at a wedding when they
shaping
played
up to
Brighton,
be?
so I was actually quite happy about that. That's bank holiday weekend at the August
Well,
24th.
that-
'Cause that's
I
another
was
long
quite
trip for the
happy.
Amex, isn't it?
Yeah, I was quite happy about the timing of it, because that they always seem to play Brighton in May or August, and that's been maintained. And obviously, it's always, the weather's quite nice down there, as we discovered in May. So that's one of the perks of that. But I see again they've got Brentford and Chelsea as back-to-back aways
Yeah, I
this
noticed
time in
that.
May. But yeah, it's they're still trying to give us PTSD from some of those trips down there. I think we was it when we were leaving. When were we leaving? We might have been leaving the Chelsea game. Did we drive past the Brentford Stadium? I think I drove past that Brentford Stadium
Yeah.
on 3 occasions rather than just the 2 occasions. And yeah, that was long old days, but certainly days we look back on quite wistfully. But yes, I think, I was getting messages this morning from supporters. I mean, I think the fixtures had actually leaked. A friend actually, we of course get them in advance for publishing purposes, but a friend already had the PDF as well, so fans can plan in earnest. It would have been a lot more helpful had they actually given all the August fixtures specific dates and times. I still think that the Premier League have got a lot of work to do in terms of giving supporters advance notice of confirmed final dates with games. But at least with that first one, it's the earliest possible point, isn't it, on a Friday night? Being the purist, I'd have liked it to have been a Saturday 3 p.m. and I certainly think United Fulham is more of a Saturday 3 p.m. slot rather than a Friday night slot. But United are, they're almost always the biggest story in town, and they're the biggest pool on TV as well.
I remember weirdly back in high school and gathering around in like the PE change room around someone's phone who had some data. I'm not as young as I might seem, and just being so interested to see which fixtures were getting released, who everyone was playing and when. But as you get older, it doesn't really make a difference, does it? It's a bit of a boring day.
No, you kind of. I think you look at Christmas time. Obviously, it affects you and me in particular, as you've got your family in the northeast. I've got my family in the southeast as well, so that obviously you tend to try and do a bit of forward planning around that. Occasionally the odd birthday here and there, and then really it's just the big games. When are the derbies? What's the first game of the season? What's the last game of the season? So I suppose that's most people probably look at it that way. But then you've got the hardcore contingent who will be looking to do as many games as humanly possible, and of course, that some of those games can already be filed down as Sunday matches because of the Europa League schedule that United have got. So we're back to it's a season of Thursday
Trips to
nights
Astana.
and Sunday games. Quite possibly. I wait with bated breath to see what the 4 away games, because it's 4 away games now, isn't it, that United have got in this new bloody system. But
some unique corners of
we
Europe,
can only embrace
some
it.
interesting places. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Thanks for your time, Samuel. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Very kind of you.
And thanks to listeners. We'll speak to you later in the week. Bye bye.